The theme of the journey of Lent that we're on as a parish family is that of rerouting. Rerouting. We heard that message and began that journey just a few days ago on Ash Wednesday, when we were called to make that U-turn in our life, to turn away from sin, to repent, and turn back to God. Turn back to God with our whole hearts, as the prophet Joel reminded us. Repenting and turning away from sin. That is that first step, realizing the consequences, the reality, and how sin works in our lives and how sin works in the world. It's not something that we eagerly or joyfully look at in our lives. We tend to want to look at other things and kind of cover up that reality in our lives. But if we are to turn towards Christ and turn away, we need to understand it. That's why the church gives us these 3 readings today as we begin this journey of Lent. It truly begins at our beginning, when God created humanity, when God created Adam and Eve, and how God breathed his very life into them, set up this beautiful garden. Everything was wonderful. They enjoyed the nearness of God, God who walked with them in the garden. Everything was in harmony with themselves, with God, with all of God's creation. There's nothing more that they needed. God had provided for all. But then we hear how the reality of sin entered the world. How one of God's creatures, the serpent, the devil, the fallen angel, tempted them by his deception, by his lies, sowing that seed of doubt of who God is and who they were. In many ways, that's the reality, that's the basic of all sin and all temptation. It begins with a lie, it begins with a deception. It promises so much, but is unable to fulfill that which it promises. And so the serpent is saying to Adam and Eve, don't trust God. Don't trust his goodness. Don't trust his love. You can decide for yourself. God is jealous of you. These lies that they believed, that led them to disobey God, to try to grasp at that they wanted to be gods themselves. Let us determine for ourselves what is right, what is wrong. Let us not trust God. And that's how the fall began. That's how sin began. And that's how sin plays itself in our reality, in all of us, in our temptation. There's always that level of deception, that what we believe to be good may not be. Our pride gets in the way, and we believe lies about God and about ourselves. But the good news is that, as we sang in that beautiful hymn, that beautiful psalm, Psalm 51, be merciful, O God, for we have sinned. We have a God who is merciful, a God who comes to us in our sinfulness with his mercy, his love, and forgiveness. We can call upon our God. We can call upon our God who graciously gives us that love, that calls us back. But what it is in our lives, in our journey of Lent, is like the journey of the prodigal son, when he kept walking away from his God and finally he came to his senses. How do we come to our senses? How do we come to understand how sin plays itself out in our life? And how we are not alone. We are not alone in finding temptation. Jesus is with us. That's what we have in the gospel, how Jesus entered into our reality, how Jesus himself was tempted in every way that we are, every way that we are. He shows us how to overcome that temptation, how to overcome the darkness, that the lies that come to us from the father of lies. Teaches us how to believe who God is and who we are, how we can trust once again in God's mercy, and how we can see through those lies that what sin and temptation is offering us is not really life, but as St. Paul says, it's death. It's not harmony with God, with one another, with creation, with ourselves, but rather it's separation, isolation, alienation. It's violence, it's hatred, etc., etc. It's all that wants to divide us and to take that away. So there's two movements that we need in the season of Lent. And one is to recognize how that plays out in our lives. How can we do that? How does sin play in our lives? One way that we have in our tradition is looking at that sin, making an examination of conscience. Again, not the end result to be so that I feel guilty and full of shame. To feel guilt so that I can turn back to God. To see how sin has been deceiving me. How that I have disobeyed. How I've not trusted in God. There's many ways to do that, and some of you have examinations of consciences that work very well for you. We put up on our website some materials, some resources that you could use. I encourage you to do so. Again, with the end result of seeing sin, seeing the promises that temptation and temptations to sin in our lives take us away from God. They seek to destroy us. To seeing it as it is. But to do that, to know that, again, now we come back to that gospel. It's that there is one who has gone before us. There is one who is with us. I know in moments of temptation we feel alone, we feel weak. But there's one that is with us. Christ, who walks with us, who helps us to see who we are called to be, our true identity. Just want to have one final thought with that. Did you notice in the temptations of Christ in today's gospel, the first words out of the devil's mouth to Jesus? If you are the Son of God. Planting that doubt of his own identity, his own purpose, and his own mission. And Jesus understood. He never wavered from his identity, his mission, his purpose, his obedience to his Father. That's what we're called to do. Live in that obedience. Because it's in that obedience that we find life, we find freedom. The season of Lent. We repent, we turn away from sin, we believe in the gospel. There's a movement away and a movement towards. So as we move away from sin, let us turn to that mercy of God who is reaching out to us, who wishes to seek to find us when we are lost in our sin.